Welcome back to the channel. I know it's kind of been a minute since my last upload of one of these videos. Life has been all over the place, lots of traveling for work, lots of busy days where I wanted to stop and shoot, but I just couldn't. So my photo output really has dropped over these past few months. And normally this series right here, Photo Recap, is a monthly recap of my 5 favorite photos from the previous month. But since I completely skipped June, July, August, and now most of September, I thought, screw it, let's just do a summer recap instead. No promises about being more consistent moving forward, but I'm here now. I've got some photos. I'm excited to share them. So let's get into it. As always, we'll start with what I like to call the kitty corner. It's a quick roundup so you could see my cats being adorable as hell. Now, wasn't that lovely? With that out of the way, let's move on to our first photo, which is this one. This photo was taken on Harmon Phoenix 2 in the Bronica SQAI. The first photo I wanted to share was this one of a wild horse grazing on an island near Ocean City, Maryland. My girlfriend and I were on vacation with her family, and one of the highlights of that trip was going out to this island where wild horses roam completely free. It's a surreal experience. You're walking along and suddenly there's this herd of horses doing their own thing, totally indifferent to you. And this particular horse caught my eye because of the way the scene sort of framed itself. You've got these tall grasses and brush behind it, the clouds floating above, and then just this one horse with its head down, chewing the grass at the very bottom of the frame. Instead of trying to get more of the ground or more of the horse's body centered in the frame, I deliberately let the sky dominate the photo. It almost flips the usual balance of how we're used to looking at an animal photo. There's something interesting about how much space surrounds the horse. All that negative space pulls your attention downward toward this small moment of life against this much bigger backdrop. And it kind of reminds me of that John Ford scene in The Fabelmans where he tells Steven Spielberg, or the Steven Spielberg stand-in, that if the horizon is dead center, the photo is boring, but if it's at the very top or the very bottom, it becomes interesting. That rule, I think, is at play here. The horse is basically grazing on the edge of the frame, and that tension makes the image work, in my opinion. Another thing I love is how the film rendered the colors. This was shot on Harmon Phoenix 2 in medium format on my Bronica. Phoenix is still a pretty new film stock, so part of the fun is seeing what it does in different conditions. In this case, the sky leans into that cool cyan, almost painterly in tone, which contrasts beautifully with the warm, earthy color of the horse. The greens in the grass and brush look soft but distinct, not overly sharp, which adds to that almost dreamlike quality. And when I look at this photo, it feels more than just a horse photo. There's something about the composition, the colors, and the atmosphere that makes it feel like it could be an album cover, like it's hinting at a story or a mood beyond just the subject itself. It feels quiet, it feels calm, but also kind of striking in its simplicity. This photo was also taken on Harmon Phoenix 2 with the Bronica SQAI. One of the mornings while we were in Ocean City, Maryland, my girlfriend and I got up at some ungodly hour, well before sunrise, because we wanted to see the sun come up over the water. We were lucky enough to be staying right next to the beach, so we just wandered out into the dark. The sand was still cold under our feet, and by the time we made it to the shore, the place was already alive. Dozens of other people had the same idea, and it felt like we had almost stumbled into a quiet festival, a whole event built around something that happens every single morning, but somehow still feels rare when you catch it. The photo itself captures the moment a few minutes after the sun broke over the horizon. The colors lean soft and pastel, lavender, rose, a faint orange strip, and you can see that characteristic Phoenix 2 coolness in the blues of the water and the sky. The wave in the foreground is just beginning to curl. In the sand, you can make out faint and scattered footprints grounding the scene in some sort of human presence. It's not just a sunrise, it's the memory of being there, the brisk morning air, the sound of the surf, the sense that for a few moments the world slows down enough to remind you of your place in it. Sunrises have that way of making you feel both small and alive at the same time, as if all of your stresses, all of your responsibilities fade into the background, replaced with this quiet perspective. I took a ton of photos that morning, and honestly, I could swap this one out for several others on that roll and a roll of 35 that I was shooting, but I chose this one because it's the frame that carries the memory most fully to me. Yet it's also a great example of how Phoenix 2 has evolved as a film stock. When Harmon first introduced Phoenix at the end of 2023, it was a very different beast. It was rugged, had heavy contrast, it had very noticeable grain, and a lot of warmth. It had character, but it wasn't exactly balanced. With Phoenix 2, especially in the 120 format, you could see how they've worked to refine it. It's sharper, less contrasty, and with much cooler tones. In fact, they may have overcorrected toward the blue side, which you can see here in this photo in the water and the sky. But look, it's exciting because it shows real progression. If Harmon keeps making these kinds of strides, I could imagine Phoenix growing into a genuine competitor to Kodak's color films within the next 5 years. That's just speculation, but fingers crossed, it would be a huge win for film photography. This photo was shot on Harmon Phoenix 2 in 35mm in my Ricoh XR2. Now, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not much of a street photographer. I don't really fall into that Bruce Gilden or Gary Winogrand camp of ambushing people with a camera. That's never really been my vibe. But as we were walking down the boardwalk, I spotted this person dressed head to toe in a Stitch costume, a big blue Disney character, strolling along with this little black case in hand for some reason, and I couldn't resist. I fiddled with my camera like I was just adjusting something, and then, right as they passed by, I snapped the photo. Now, it wasn't until later when I looked at the photo that I realized how perfectly strange the whole scene really was. Because directly behind Stitch are these massive sand sculptures, part of an event called Jesus at the Beach Music and Ministry Festival. They built towering dunes carved with the face of Jesus, with crosses and scripture. This whole display of devotion set up right there in the sand. And so you get this hilarious and maybe slightly absurd juxtaposition, a Disney mascot strutting confidently in the foreground while Jesus Christ looms solemnly in the background. And whether you're religious or not, the contrast feels pretty sharp. To me, it says something about the world we live in, where consumer culture, cartoon characters, and corporate mascots often draw more attention than faith or spirituality. It's not exactly a hot take to say that capitalism overshadows religion in our society, but this photo captures it in a way that feels both funny and unsettling. And I like this image because it reminds me of someone like Elliot Erwitt, who was a master at finding humor in the everyday. There's that same offbeat wit here, though the humor hinges on recognizing both Stitch and Jesus, icons from two entirely different universes that somehow end up sharing the same frame. I actually shot another photo that day that I thought about using in this one's place. I'll show you that one right now. It's a photo of two men hauling a large wooden cross across the boardwalk past ice cream stands and henna shop tattoos. It had that same kind of surreal tension, this clash between devotion and distraction, between the sacred and the commercial. The boardwalk towns are full of that kind of energy, these strange collisions of belief systems, of spirituality, brushing up against t-shirt shops with Bugs Bunny smoking a vape or something. But this photo of Stitch on the boardwalk feels like a distilled version of that. It's playful and absurd on the surface, but layered with these contradictions underneath. Again, this photo was shot on Harmon Phoenix 2 with the Ricoh XR2, and it also shows the film's quirks. The blue tones pop against the sandy backdrop. The sharp midday light is softened just enough by the emulsion. It's an odd little picture, but for me, it says a lot about the world that we were walking through that day. This photo was taken on expired Fuji NPS 160 in the Pentax K1000. This next photo takes a detour from the beach and the boardwalk and lands us somewhere quieter, upstate New York. I shot it on an expired roll of Fuji NPS 160 loaded into my Pentax K1000, and this roll had been sitting around for decades, 20 years past its expiration, which meant I had absolutely no idea what I was going to get when I developed it. Shooting expired film is always a gamble. So much of it depends on how it was stored, and there's always the risk that the emulsion has shifted beyond repair. But to my surprise, this roll delivered beautifully. Sharpness, color, character, the tones it rendered were soft yet crisp with a warmth that felt both nostalgic and wholly alive. Honestly, it kind of staggered me. The subject here is my girlfriend's sister's dog, his name is Tito, who had tucked himself beneath a car to escape the summer heat. You can see him lounging in the shade with one of his chew toys, giving the camera a look that feels both mischievous and charming. I love photographing animals whenever I can because they refuse to play by the rules. They're unpredictable, and most of the time your photos end up being blurs of movement or half-closed eyes, but every once in a while, you get lucky, and they pose as if they know exactly what you're doing. And that's what happened here. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's a wild one. He's endlessly energetic, capable of circling you 100 times without breaking a sweat. But in this frame, he looks calm, almost regal, like he knows he's being documented. That's part of why I love this photo so much. It isn't just about testing expired film or seeing what a stock from 20 years ago can still produce. It's also about the serendipity of catching an unpredictable subject in a perfect moment. Expired film adds another layer to that unpredictability. You can't control the way the colors shift or the way that the grain forms, but when it all comes together, as it did here, the results feel doubly rewarding. This shot ended up being my favorite from that roll, and it's a reminder of why I keep chasing these experiments. For anyone curious, I did do a full video on that roll of Fuji NPS 160, and seeing this film come through my email from my lab was a highlight of the entire process. This photo was taken on Kodak Gold in the Nikon F3. And so we come to the final photo of this batch, shot on Kodak Gold with the Nikon F3. I want to say this was taken at sunset, though at first I thought it might have been sunrise. That's one of the funny things about all of this traveling that I've been doing so often for work. My schedule is tied to hotels and coastal cities, and the line between morning and evening sometimes blurs in my mind, but I'm fairly sure that this was Virginia Beach, and I had just come back from a day of work when I looked out of my hotel room window and I saw the sky putting on a show. How else is there to put it? What the photo captures is the sun straining to break through a veil of clouds, spilling light across the ocean in this radiant, almost painterly gradient. The clouds aren't just background here, they're active, sculpting the light into something dramatic, something divine. There's an otherworldliness to it, as if something larger than us was pressing through the atmosphere for a moment, reminding you that the sky and the sea are vast enough to dwarf anything we might be dealing with on the ground. And that leads me to talk about what makes this image for me, and what you might miss on first glance, which is the three tiny figures on the beach at the bottom of the frame. They look minuscule, almost like ants scattered across the sand, set against the immensity of the ocean and the sky. Without them, the photo would still be beautiful, but they bring scale and perspective, and with that, a kind of quiet poetry. They make the grandeur of the scene hit a little bit harder because you're reminded of just how small we are in comparison. There's a layering to the image too. The waves in the foreground, they're restless and kinetic, and they're contrasted against the stillness of the water further out, and then the towering expanse of the sky above it all. This is just one of those photos that kind of resists easy explanation for me. Part of why it speaks to me is hard to put into words. It feels spiritual in a way, not religious necessarily, but connecting to that sense of awe when you're reminded of how much bigger the world is than you. Kodak Gold, in its own way, helps that feeling along. The film renders warmth without exaggerating it, balancing natural color with just enough glow to make the scene feel timeless. And just as a closer to this whole video, this photo kind of sums up a lot of what I've been chasing with my camera this summer. Not just documenting places that I've been, but catching those fleeting intersections of light, landscape, and life. Moments that make you pause and see the world differently, even if just for a second. And with that, we've reached the end of this little summer recap. I really appreciate you spending the time with me, looking through these photos and hearing a bit about what went into them. This series has been such a reminder of why I keep coming back to film photography, not just for the look, but for the way that it slows you down and makes you notice things you might otherwise overlook. Thanks again so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, feel free to stick around for more. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on my channel. If you want to support me beyond that, you can take a look over at these videos where I talk about some books that I wrote. One book is a novel called Ultra Boys that I self-published probably about a year ago now, and the other one is a novella that I published about 6 to 8 months ago. I highly recommend checking those out and heading over to Amazon and picking up a copy of those books. I put a lot of time into them, and I think you guys would really enjoy that. That's about it from me. I've got a few roles still waiting to be developed and plenty more experiments on the horizon that I'm excited to share. So until then, I'll see you in the next one.